your presentation.
Great. Thank you so much, Ben. That's my first thing, is to express gratitude to you and to Liz and to the association for having us here, and then also to my co-presenters, Emet and Lisa, who responded to my a little bit out of the blue call on this. But we are united by our desire to make a better world through permaculture and social ecology and a few other things. So I'm very grateful to all the radical imagination that came to make this possible, and also the technical support. So what we're going to do is I'm going to talk for a few minutes, and then Emet will speak, and then Lisa will speak, and then we should have time for some discussion. I'm going to bring up my slides right now. It's happening. Hang on. Okay, so hopefully you can see that. You can see me. And I am going to proceed to just start to share what I have to say here. So what I'm going to talk about for a few minutes is principles for a revolutionary permaculture. And it's not just principles, of course, but principles wrapped in with practices, because we have theory, but what matters is what we're doing with that theory, and what we learn from what we're doing comes back into our thinking about it. So that's the dynamic. And I have here, these slides all have links on them to everything here. I have a list of resources. This is meant to be, like, as they call it, thorn medicine, like, a provocation for you to engage with us about these ideas, to bring them forward, to, work with us in developing it, because it is that struggle between ideas and practice and putting it together that makes us have a path forward. It's in our ability to solve the problems that we have before us. So I'll move on here to this. Many of us are familiar with Holmgren's, the permaculture principles, rooted in the middle by the three permaculture ethics. And what I want to say is that these principles are great principles, but what I would say is, right now, in the time that we are facing, they need to be expanded and deepened, and in some cases changed up a bit. But they are incredibly, they are complementary and they are essential. But I would argue that they're not achievable unless we undertake also our revolutionary permaculture principles, which I'm going to talk about in just a moment. But what I first want to talk about is the problematic context in which we are practicing permaculture, right? We are acutely aware of the crises that we are facing, the pandemic, racist police violence, climate change. But these crises that are now bearing their ugliness here are really, as we know, fruits of an embedded and ongoing crisis, which is a consequence of profound imbalances that have been building in place and strengthening themselves. The imbalances have been strengthening themselves. And so what that means is that we have to think about the roots of that embedded imbalance. And in social ecology, as philosophized by Murray Bookchin, we see that the roots of this environmental crisis are in the social crisis, in the relationship between humans and other humans. And in both cases, this domination of some humans by other humans. I'm sorry, I'm going to pause for a second. Ben, are you muted too? Or I'm hearing some background noise. I don't know if it's, thanks. Thank you. So the domination of some humans by other humans leads to the exploitation and destruction of nature, which is what, as permaculturalists, we're trying to undo, come up with systems that undo. So it is this social problem that has to be addressed fundamentally, and it can be addressed in our permaculture practice. So what is this social crisis? Well, most prominently, we have capitalism, which is the private ownership of the means of production, including the land, and its engagement in an endless grow or die dynamic, which is inherent in it. And it, of course, does not now and never has taken care of the land and the people, and is not compatible with a world in which the land and the people are taken care of. So, and while we can see that it is sowing its own instability, its own seeds of its own destruction, it's destroying itself. Nevertheless, it is so adaptable that and enduring that we need to work to struggle to overcome it. And we need to do that because it's in contrast to everything that we believe in practice in our permaculture principles. Having the time to smell the roses, having roses that are not free, that are not full of chemicals, et cetera. These are in contrast to the capitalist system. And so we need to think about what is post-capitalism. What are we doing post-capitalism? And that means necessarily that we need to now and into the future have democracy. We need collective decision-making that enables nature's fecundity to help us achieve freedom and justice collectively, and as well as protect the rights of individuals. Another part of the context in which we are operating is this issue of owning the land, which many people have questioned. How do we come to own the land? But owning the land is this questionable convenience which allows us to practice permaculture for the most part. Now, I know that Melanie is doing permaculture and I'm doing permaculture on public land, and there's many other ways in which we're doing this. But the concept of ownership and control of land is a fundamental question that we have to address. And who has say over what happens with that land? What is the purpose of that land? So also to go back to the pie there, which is meant to take care of these issues, the fair share. But the pie is, particularly as Richard Holmgren describes it, is we own the pie, we decide what's in the pie, and we decide who gets what amount of the pie based on after satisfying our own needs, which of course our needs need to be satisfied. This is not to say that we are meant to altruistically give up everything that we have and give away our land. It's about collective decision-making about how can we all thrive and not cause harm to each other and to the earth. So I would argue that the fair share is not enough because it does not address those power relations that have to be upended. And it also, we need to push past our kind of, I mean, it's not the only theory of change, but the theory of change that by the power of our example, we will convince others to not, to change society, because that ignores the resistance to change and the power that is benefiting from the current system. So from one backyard at a time, I would say, let's go back to Frederick Douglass's remark about without struggle, there is no progress. So I'm gonna just quickly go through some of the proposals I have for principles and practices of revolutionary permaculture. And this one is a no-brainer and no issue at all for permaculturalists. You've got the radical imagination down. You can plant a seed and imagine what the food forest looks like. So in fact, I would say that sort of the typical revolutionary has a harder time believing and understanding and what the world can be. So I'm just going to skip right through this one because this is obvious. So anti-hierarchy is an explicit principle of our practice, where we are looking for how domination is being reproduced. We are looking for how racism, systems of racism, or systems of economic inequality are being reproduced in our permaculture practice, and to undo those things, are how women and the disabled, how queer folks are able to have full and equal standing and voice with everyone, how we are doing circles instead of speakers at the front of the room, as I am doing right now. Use the chat box to undo this hierarchy, to undo embedded hierarchies, which are the roots of these systems of domination, and of course, which are just the the stock and trade of industrial agriculture and the traditional food system. Justice related to this, of course. We have to address these issues and not say that they're unrelated to the work that we are doing. And here is, I think, a beautiful expression of what actually our goal is. You know, many of us make goals which seem like realistic, achievable goals, even if they're dreaming, you know, of producing 10% of our food, et cetera. I'd say let's have a goal in the line of radical imagination of buen vivir, which is, it's from the Quiche, from the native peoples in Ecuador and in Latin America, this concept of collective well-being in harmony with nature, that this is our goal. And also informed by this are the practices of agroecology, which are about farmer to farmer and traditional ways of producing food, but also sustaining an economy which is about this collective benefit of all. And on that same theme, what are our practices of collective culture and building community power? Where are we, you know, thinking about how what we're doing is about sharing and caring? And if you go through these slides again and click on this, this is actually a link to a video of a temple a Sikh temple where they're feeding 1,000 people, and these are some of the members of the temple doing the dishes afterwards. And so how do we build this collective power in a way that protects the rights of individuals, prioritizes what's important? We have to have systems of democracy. We have to have bylaws and cooperation that is built in, that is where we, through putting our heads together, having our voices heard, listening to unpopular opinions, you know, through this effort, our system of democracy so much deeper and better than the representative democracy, where we give our voice away to people who unfortunately rarely represent our interests, you know. And so I would say let's also, we can look to, I've written about, there's links on here, some amazing traditions that we can learn from and build out our democracy the way that we feel like both functions, is efficient, but also allows voices to be heard. So the Haudenosaunee Confederacy of these folks, you know, from 1124 to the present, incredibly remarkable and amazing system everyone should learn about. Okay, my slide is loading for some reason. Let me go back and see if it comes up. I don't know that. Well, I'll skip to this one. We can come back to, I don't even remember what that one was, but we'll come back. So another one of these revolutionary permaculture principles, I would argue, is truth and reconciliation, where we do confront colonial past, slave owning past, et cetera, but also, you know, going back to the land, understanding the land, understanding our history, our struggles, whatever was happening, having a deep understanding in order to move towards and address historical injustices in our practice. And the next one I also call truth and reconciliation. This is to the truth of the materiality of what we do. And we, you know, we love it when we find new tools. And I bet, like, you know, it's hard to give thought to where the metal, where that tool came from, how it was produced, where was it produced, and the entire life cycle of that instrument or of that. And solar power, unfortunately, is one of those that is extremely problematic if we take this approach. But nevertheless, I would say we have to. The picture on the left is of a nickel mine in Madagascar, where a great deal of the world's nickel that is essential for the production of solar panels comes from, and the incredible destruction that mine has created, both socially and economically, and of course to the natural environment. So we have to look at this, not to say stop, we can't do anything or use any tools, but to integrate it into our practice. How are we solving this problem? So here's, this is the last one that I'll give you right now, which is this concept of self-defense or collective self-defense. So this is a picture that I've been using for a long time. It's from several years ago. These are the teens of Roxbury in our neighborhood, Mulaney's neighborhood, and the teens of REAP from the Alternatives for Community Environment and Environmental Justice program here. And on this lot, right in the heart of Roxbury, they built this incredibly beautiful setting for growing food, and they're framed it as this existential issue: grow or die. They recognize, like, we need to be able to feed ourselves, to have access to healthy food, or we die. Like, we are dying. We have premature death rates, our lives, we're imprisoned, etc. You know, this is what we need to do. And yet today, this is what it is. This is what it is. And it's, you know, these are condominiums, and they've lost control of the land, as so many of the people who have come before us have lost control of the land and in our ability to grow or face death and destruction. So I would say, I don't know, of course, how it is that we do this land defense, but we have to think about it. And now I remember it was on the slide we missed, the slide that I'm not sure why it wouldn't load, but I should have done this as, I don't know. So we'll see if it comes up. But what's on here is a reference to expanding the circle, to mutual aid and solidarity. To, this is there was an image from the Via Campesina, the worldwide peasants movement, and also the MST, which is the landless workers movement in Brazil. They have so much to teach us if we unite ourselves with their struggle, and we support them and they support us in a global perspective, seeing ourselves as being in common struggle with the folks around the world who we have in common. So I'll conclude just with this little model, saying that we need to evolve these structures of democracy and cooperation in our practice, and we need to have goals expanded beyond soil remediation, which I love doing. It's so important, but to include justice, buen vivir, and building community power. That our methods, I didn't talk about dialectical harmony, I could if we have time, truth and reconciliation, and feminism. We need to expand the circles for solidarity and mutual aid, and we need to start thinking about self-defense. So thanks a lot. I will stop sharing and we can move on to Emet.
I'm just taking my slides on. Thank you, Cora. It was great. Sorry, just share. Okay. Hi, everyone. I'm participating to this event from Turkey, a Mediterranean town called Marmaris Datça. It's very hot here. So thank you for including me from outside of the US, but I have lived in the US, based in Seattle, about 8 years. I know many of my permaculture peers. Today, I'm going to focus on emergency response to post-COVID-19 period. In permaculture, we talk about, can you see my slides now?
We can see them. You could make it full screen or present
Yeah, I'm
mode.
making. Mm-hmm. Okay, it's better now. In permaculture, we teach emergency response. It's not very focused topic, but it's so significant, especially in our future events, not only for global climate change, from social aspect, economical aspect, of course, ecological aspect. As I'm a social ecologist, I also focus on domination of our nature. It depends on domination to each other. So hierarchies is the main point in my presentation as well. Just very brief summary, how our global food system is working, just general figures here. The global food system is responsible for up to 30% of the total greenhouse emission. According to some statistics, it's more than this. Farmers are forced to waste their produce between 10 to 30%. Annually, supermarkets are controlling the food between 70 to 95%. It is so significant in emergency period we have experienced. Now I will touch little based on my projects. I have lived in New Zealand as well. I have started a refugee and migrants sustainability project just in the middle of the town of Wellington, the capital city. With women's leadership, it's called Innermost Gardens. It became an educational and demonstration site for many of the groups, including the school groups. This is our symbol. I focus on the edges in the cities. City as a whole in social ecology, we say, we use the quote from Lefebvre, city should be taken into consideration as a holistic ecosystem. It's linked with the rural and urban, how it should be linked in a healthy way. I'm also editor of this wonderful book. I really suggest you to have one. Social ecology and the right to the city from social ecology, from David Harvey's slogan, right to the cities. I was the editor. I was the contributor of this book. My piece was focusing on limits to growth, criticizing the terms in green development from radical perspective, from social ecology perspective. So cultural disparities after COVID-19, actually we are still having that period, especially economic, ecological and economical disparities is increasing. What to do as permaculturists to contribute to these disparities? It can be less in our neighborhood, in our towns. So my focus is that our Innermost Gardens in Wellington, just in the green belt, they were doing community composting. This is our educational house. We have about 4-acre land, food forest around the land. It was DDT contaminated land. New Zealand was the second DDT producer, highly used in greenfields after Vietnam. During the Second World War, we have concentrated on cleaning the DDT contamination via bioremediation. Now our project is alive in the middle of the town. My my friends were doing community composting, mushroom growing, and offering lots of, including permaculture workshops. And we work with Maoris in connecting with my indigenous culture is so important to me. If I want to be a part of a project, indigenous people, local people, first things we need to concentrate on how to connect with these people, how to bring them into the project. It's so hard work. We have put 3 years effort to get a piece of land renting from the city council, convincing the local groups. If it's a white dominant area, it's more hard. The city council was pushing us go far away from the city center, at least 1.5 hours beyond the city. I was persisting to be just in the middle of the city because these people are already invisible. They have many skills related to the soil and contribute. They can contribute to their new land, new people, dominant people, white people can learn from them, they can acknowledge from them. So it took us 3 years to get a piece of land. So my friends were focusing on emergency response at the same time during COVID-19 period. For example, community composting, they have stopped using this collecting the food scraps. They work with the city council directly, but they have stopped. They don't know how to respond to this emergency. It took at least 2 months to put this this sign. Latest COVID updates on our Facebook page, it says compost bins are open for contactless drop off. So they have developed a, method starting collecting the organic waste again. They distribute to the local people after composting is aging. This was our land. This is our land still. This is from the front. Accessibility of this land was another problem during COVID-19 period. Of course, there was a quarantine period, but after that, a lot of elderlies used this land, but even they didn't know how to enter, what to do. My friends have taught to put some signs. You can use our land and you can do this and you can close the gates. So accessibility to the commons, I'm focusing on here. A common land open to the public in emergency situation. We need to think about all those things, how to access, how people can get benefit out of these common lands. The other point is seed libraries. For example, I'm living in Turkey now. I was creating some gardens as a permaculturist. I was setting up, implementing some gardens. I have struggled to access to the heirloom seeds. We have a lot of seed saving groups in Turkey, but since the structural formation is not unhierarchical, it's hierarchical. That's why the main people up front, they were controlling the seeds, heirloom seeds. They were not posting, and we have struggled how to access the seed libraries or seed resources, heirloom seed resources. We use this term garden. Every problem can be resolved in the garden. It's not permaculture term. It's related to ancient people's term. We permaculturists, we should be really careful where the knowledge comes from, where the method, where the skills comes from. We need to learn how to acknowledge ancient and local people. So everything gardens and everything can be solved in the gardens. It's an ancient term, not permaculture term. So I want to focus on these changes, our relationship to the food, and on the right side of the slide, encourage trade and generosity, gets us outside of the food industrial food system. These are many others, but these are the things how in emergency situation can be trapped in dominant power structure. In Turkey, I have spent a lot of time in Istanbul. Istanbul was having a lot of bostans, we called community gardens, ancient community gardens called bostans. We have 1,500 years of bostans, but they are under threat now. They were feeding all ancient city around around these historical walls, but they are under threat. They are under development projects threat. So people are organizing demonstrations and trying to keep even very little piece of the garden as a representative level, but there is a hardship of court battles, everything. This bostan I would like to talk about a little. It's called Roma Bostan. This bostan, which is community garden, was born during the Gezi movement. If anyone can't remember what was Gezi, in Istanbul, a lot of green spaces were under threat for development. Only in Taksim Square we have left very little greens, and people said enough and enough. We don't want these trees should be cut, and we are here to protect, to be vigilant, to conserve our little greens. This area was rubbish dump. Maybe 2 or 3, maybe 4 trucks of rubbish have been collected and cleaned. Luckily, the soil was cleaned to cultivate the edibles. 45 degrees slope, this land. My permaculture friends have involved in very intensively, and many young people have put their effort, even night. This area was used by the drug addictives or violent people. They have been invited to the project. They have been a part of the project. And one night I was there, I was invited, it was getting dark, the coordinator of the Roma Bostan was taking me what stage they are at their implementation in the garden. Couple of drug addictive people or violent people, they called in the past, they have brought fruit trees. They were really insisting to plant those fruit trees. They were donating. They were so excited to put something in the garden. I mean, in the meantime, in 6 months' time, all those not included people in the society, they have become main people of this Bostan. This is about 2-acre land. It's alive now, and these are the Viking beds, since it's facing to the south. Viking bed gardens, you may know from Australia, the drought-resistant garden, self-watering system. So there are many fruit trees, 20 fruit trees, 100 and something support species now in the Bostan. I'm really proud of this because these people are involving in the Roma Bostan. They are everywhere to protect the other lands around Istanbul now. Mega projects, they are opposing the other mega projects. This is where we used to have ancient gardens around the city, ancient city walls. Now it's under threat. These poor people, they are mostly migrants. They grow their foods and they sell their foods. That just daily life survival through their veggies. They were living in this way in last 60 years. Now look at that. They are really in serious situation. Cora has mentioned agroecology. I pay a lot of attention to La Via Campesina and agroecology movement. Actually, I was keeping myself distant from the permaculture movement since 2015 because I was at the UK for World Permaculture Convergence, and Syrian refugees were flowing into Europe, and there was a refugee action day during our convergence. Over 5,000 people, permaculturists all over the world. Rosemary Merrow announced to be a part of this World Refugee Day. And we have kept announcing this gathering during lunchtime, not affecting our other events, workshops. Only 22 people turned out of 5,000 permaculturists. And then I said to myself, this is really this is really sad. They are not paying attention to what's happening other parts of the world. My heart is broken. I was keeping myself distant from the permaculture movement since Cora has encouraged me to join to this panel. I pay a lot of attention to agroecology and La Via Campesina and feminism, how to food growing women farmers and people of women of color especially, how patriarchal system in food growing communities can be overcome. I'm paying a lot of attention to those areas now. Why I'm paying attention to agroecology more than in permaculture now? Because they are into land sharing, producers and conservationists. They encourage people to share the land with other people. As Cora mentioned, my main focus is teaching the skills and knowledge in between the farmers. They call from farmers to farmers. Only with permaculture certification, people can teach you. They are not into this. I come from an agriculture family background. We used to grow almost 90% of our own all food. I have 3 different permaculture certification. I have led a couple of different projects, different Western world, but still I always, my mind goes back to what my grandmothers was doing, how my granddad was composting our shit, our human waste. Those are the first knowledge. I have many organic land management certification. I have gained in the US couple of other certifications as well. Still my mind goes to that what I have picked up from my ancient ancestors. So the agroecology, hopefully in future permaculture can pay more attention to work with agroecology. I don't want to say expert, practitioners, teaching and skills sharing, farmers to farmers sharing, territorial markets and short food supply chain. They focus on the bio region, very, very real, not only talking, and they are doing on the ground. Less talk, more concrete action on the ground. seed saving and seed exchange. It's really happening from the heart. The other points I would like to make, precarious situation of food and farm workers during COVID-19 period. I don't know whether you have paid attention how farm workers situation is badly. They are treated really unhumane situation. I have visited a couple of farms in the US, in California as well. I know how Mexican farmers are living in that situation. Here in Turkey, people are from the Kurdish speaking area, people are Syria. They are working in the farmlands and they are not considered as a human almost. Their living conditions, their social conditions, our food chain have that sort of pain. We permaculturists, we need to pay more attention to those all social problems. As I said, I pay attention to women farmers, especially people of color, women of color, because they are working as farm workers, mostly in developed countries or in their home countries. Yes, non-patriarchal, non-hierarchical, local and acknowledging indigenous and local people, ancient people's skills and knowledge should be our main focus. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emet. Lisa, you're up.
Okay, thank you. I think, Emet, you'll have to stop sharing screen. So
yeah, I'm okay, thank you. Is it done? Clear now?
Yes, all clear.
Okay.
All right, so thank you, everyone. Thank you, Emet and Cora and all the organizers with PAN for organizing this really important conversation. So excited to be here. I'm coming to you from occupied territory, Pecumtuck territory, otherwise known as Amherst, Massachusetts. And I'm going to share a little bit about the historical moment that we're in and some of the potential and opportunity that we have as permaculture designers to really have this lead into some great radical transformation of our society. And then I'll highlight a couple points about what we have to offer as permaculturalists, and then also what do we have to learn and who can we learn from as permaculturalists. So just to say, we all know this, but to highlight that we're really in the middle of a historical moment. And this moment, because of a lot of different confluences from some of what Cora talked about, we've got the pandemic and the COVID-19. We have highlighting state violence, particularly against Black people, that's being exposed on the media and calling for vast protests from all over the world. We also have some of the deep impacts of climate change. And so all of these things are converging at the same moment to really seed the ground for the potential for deep transformation, right? So a lot of people have been living with these realities for a long time, knowing that the system that we're living in is unjust, unequal, and that there is a need for deep transformation. But COVID-19 and the exposure of state violence against Black people has really ripped the Band-Aid off, ripped the sunglasses off for a lot of people that were not aware of the reality that we're living in. So it didn't necessarily create these conditions, it just exposed already deeply embedded injustice that is a part of the hierarchical, capitalist, colonial world and framework that we've been living in for over the last 500 years. And so this moment really shows us the potential, and I say potential because it's not automatic. There's no guarantee that this moment will lead to long-term systemic transformation, but we're seeing the potential of this unveiling of the injustice that's been deeply baked into the DNA of the system we're living in. And I think more and more people are coming to realize that normal has gone away, that somehow I think we were all waiting, okay, COVID-19, we'll get the vaccine, and then we're just gonna go back to normal and everything will be fine. But this has really exposed that the deep kind of injustice in our healthcare system, also in our food system, also in the way that we work and our economic system. So really this idea that we're just going to go back to normal has really faded away. And so that really seeds this exploration, the deep radical imagination, as Cora was talking about, of, okay, so what's next? If we know that the system's not working, what can we put in its place? And so when we're talking about really kind of getting at deep transformation, what's really become apparent in the last few months is how deeply connected that racism is to perpetuating the system of injustice. You know, thinking about racism and colonization as two root systems of oppression that, unless we really address head on in the way that we're transforming society, we're just going to end up replicating the current system. So we really have to acknowledge how deep and harmful racism is, both for people of color and also white people. It's very harmful also for white people to be a part of white supremacy and racism. So we're really having to address these social inequities in order to facilitate a truly transformational system. And also that this won't be done easily. This is just a shot that I took from the Portland newspaper, just from some of the protests that are happening out in Portland, Oregon. Again, this could be a shot from a Black Lives Matter protest. This could be a shot from the global justice protests that were happening in the late 90s. This could be a shot from so many different eras. So whenever there is this potential for deep and transformative systemic change, we're met with violence, right? We're met with resistance because there's so many people invested in the way that the current system has been operating and that feel scared of losing that control, that the violence is met with that threat of exposure or threat of actual systemic change. So we need to really think about strategies. And I think as permaculturists, this is one of our strong suits, is we're saying that we actually, and I think this is what drew me first to permaculture, kind of coming from global justice and activist movements, is we're actually saying to the Arundhati Roy quote that another world is actually possible. So in order to create this new world, we have to have that revolutionary vision and imagination, and we actually have to show people what a new system could look like. So, okay, we know that this current economic system has us all working so much that we actually don't have a lot of time to do the things that we'd like to do. Certain people are left out. People aren't able to even put food on their tables, and their jobs are very fragile. That we can see this with all the people on unemployment. And so we can actually say as permaculturalists, well, look at these examples of mutual aid, these examples of growing food out of garbage that really contradict what we've been told about the economy. That there's not enough to go around, that we're competing against each other for the scraps, right? We can actually directly point to some of our projects that contradict this, and we can actually look at the wisdom of ecological systems in nature that also point a direct contradiction to this myth of scarcity that is, again, one of those underlying foundational DNA aspects to keeping this current system going. So we have this ability to really rethink, I would say, our nature philosophy. As permaculturalists, we actually say that we're not separate from or dominant over nature, that we are actually nature working, and that different way of thinking, although it may not sound like much, it actually, when you're looking at different theories of social change and you're looking at the work of Donella Meadows, we actually see that this shattering, this shift of a paradigm, these welcoming of new underlying ideas of the way the world works actually has a lot of power. And that this type of transformation that we can illustrate through our permaculture projects can actually happen in just a conversation, right? Or it can happen with a tour of a forest garden, just seeing the way that it works, right? So we can have our whole idea of the way that the world works flip in just a few seconds. So some of her work is saying this is very easy to do on a systemic or on an individual level, right? Having our paradigms open up and understanding this new reality of the way the world works. But to do that on a societal level, it's actually extremely difficult. And there's a lot of resistance, as we're seeing in the streets of the protests, to having that new ideas take hold. There's a whole, we don't have time today to go into it, but ways to kind of work with that. But just to point out that a paradigm shift is very powerful for long-term systemic change. The other thing that we have going for us as permaculture designers is that we have this whole, you know, as Emet was saying, this ancestral indigenous knowledge of how to work with nature. We have these principles, these design processes, and also these techniques that can be direct examples of both how we can heal, because I think that it's part of addressing those inequities, and we can show healing in the land. And I think through healing the land, we also get a chance to heal ourselves. So we can point to direct examples of regeneration, healing, abundance, this ability for self-determination, where if you look at some of the whys of why we're here, is really, if we think about even our own households, can we heat our homes through the winter without depending on the oil and gas industries, right? Without depending on privatized electricity to generate some of the energy for our homes. You know, could we live just with the foods in our backyard and not having to go to the supermarket, right? So I would say we're fundamentally baked into dependence on the system, which is a direct correlation to really colonial frameworks and thoughts, right? So we literally, although we might really want to deeply pull away from the society, we're literally dependent on it for our food, for our energy, for our livelihood. And so permaculture really points out ways that we can lead to both self-determination and community power and determination through harvesting energy from organic material, through growing some of our own food, making our own medicine, relying on mutual aid, right? So we can, there's a lot of power in that knowledge. I wanted to share a little story about this idea of a paradigm shift. And this is a tree stump in New Zealand from the Kauri forest. And on first glance, you might look at it and say that this is a dead stump. And so two ecologists were walking through this forest and they started paying more and more attention to this tree stump. And they went over to it, they knocked on it, they scratched it, and they actually realized that although there was no photosynthesis happening, there's no leaves, that this tree stump was actually alive. And so that led to all kinds of questions. And what they actually realized is that this tree stump was a part of this larger forest network, and that it was the surrounding trees and the mycelial connections that were able to keep this tree stump alive, right? It was sending it water, it was sending it nutrients and resources through the mycelial connections in the soil. And I just point this out to say, you know, we can look at this a lot of different ways, and we might have been trained, you know, if we're thinking about the current paradigm, to see this stump as mooching off of the system, right? So the stump is a dead tree stump, it's not contributing to the society of trees anymore. It's leaching, it's a parasite off of the system. That's one way, and I would say that's our current paradigm of maybe how to view this tree stump. But it also calls into question all of these other potential stories, these potential narratives, potential paradigms, as this tree stump being really deeply connected and valued by the community of forest that surrounds it, you know, so deeply connected that the abundance of nutrients and water are actually being shared to this tree stump. So I'd say, you know, we have about 500 years of the old story. And so how can we really choose to see, really choose a new story that can help guide this transformation and one of abundance and mutual aid and interconnection. And so really this paradigm shift of permaculture, I think, is really, really powerful, where we're saying we're letting go of the old hierarchical system of domination and control over. We're recognizing our role in the ecosystem as a keystone species that can bring about greater health, well-being, and healing. And we're just one small component of this larger pattern, this larger quilt that can put us back into right relationship and balance with the rest of the world. And we can do this, I would say that one way, and a really powerful way, is we actually have these physical gardens, these physical systems that we can invite people into, where they can actually directly experience this transformation. So this is a shot from Paradise Lot in Holyoke, Massachusetts, before and after, right? So you can see the shot on the left of really degraded soil, not much diversity, not much abundance and bounty coming off of the land. And I would say that through mutual aid, through an idea called PermaBlitz, this is a group that I was a part of, a community group here in Western Mass, that through our relationships and network with no money exchange, we were able to harvest leaves and wood chips and excess plant material and really transform through our collective labor and mutual aid this into a really abundant, extremely important example of healing and transformation that can really kind of flip the switch for people for what actually is possible, like ignite the radical imagination. I know I just have a few minutes here, so just a couple things to think about, and then what can we learn? So again, you never change things by fighting the existing reality. To change something, build a new model that makes the existing model obsolete. And that's something I believe we're directly engaged in. Is yes, fighting and protesting is really important for a myriad of reasons, but also how are we building a direct alternative that can actually meet human needs while we're regenerating and not depleting the ecosystem. And then from Audre Lorde, the master's tools will never dismantle the master's house. It may allow us temporarily to beat him in his own game, but they will never allow us to bring about genuine change. So thinking about the way, the processes, how we're doing this, right? And Cora talked about direct democracy and participation and listening and really going about change in a new way. And really thinking about the way that we do this, the process by which we engage in radical transformation is just as important, if not more important, to the eventual outcomes. And then what can we learn as permaculturalists? Where do we fall short? And who can we look to for guidance? One of my biggest inspirations is the Black Panther movement. Their survival programs are a huge example of what mutual aid can actually do. And I'd always heard of some of the free breakfast program, right, that eventually turned into subsidized school lunches, was started by the Black Panthers. And this is one of, dozens of programs that they were offering, and they were offering it because their needs were not being met by the larger society. And so they got together and they said, we need to meet some of our own needs because our communities are being left out, our communities are being discriminated against. And what really struck me when I was learning more about their survival programs is how large and comprehensive they were. And so we're not talking about hundreds of school lunches, we're talking about 20,000 meals a day. This is across dozens of cities in the US, right? So this was a highly organized, highly effective program that we can see actually through intervention with FBI and COINTELPRO was actually dismantled, right? And it led to the free lunch program, but we can actually look at the Audre Lorde quote when we're thinking about that, because that hasn't led to long-term systemic change, right? So this mutual aid project of feeding, making sure children had at least a decent breakfast was almost co-opted and then now defunded. So we need to really think about our projects and how do we ensure their integrity. And I think that another partnership that we can look to that would better ensure that integrity is what Cora was talking about with social ecology and libertarian municipalism and communalism, which has a direct correlation to the values and principles of permaculture, but really lays out both a nature philosophy and then a how to do this through direct democracy, through non-hierarchy, the principles you can see on the left, really show us, and this is not, again, not just a theory, this is being enacted. This was happening after Trump was elected, in neighborhoods such as in Seattle, where they actually came up with, every neighborhood had their own neighborhood assembly, where they had representatives that were making decisions about the needs of the community and bringing it back in a, not in a representative way, but in a direct way. We can see really this taking off in different places all over the world, and it's something to learn more about and to incorporate into our own designs. So finally, food for thought: how do our designs address larger systemic problems? How are we not just focusing on our backyard, but we're linking that to larger issues and how to solve them? How are we connecting to other social movements and not operating in isolation as a permaculture movement? How are we listening to and have decisions made from people that are most affected by the problems that we're addressing? And how do we actually have built-in accountability for those groups and feedback for ourselves? And again, I'll just close with this image that was made for Starhawk's film of the fifth sacred thing, of the real potential and the value. I don't want to underscore this enough, the visionary value that permaculture has to offer the world, the ability to think about not what's here now, but what could happen and a way to get there. And it's a huge gift. And we can lean into that more by working with other groups and not operating in isolation. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. Thanks so much. So that concludes this session's presentations. I guess I wanted to give Emet and Lisa both a chance, and I guess myself as well, if we want to ask each other a question to start off the discussion. So. I don't know if you have one right away. I wanted to ask Lisa a little bit more about the teaching of permaculture and how you think that the teaching of permaculture might be transformed to promote more of this transformation that you've been speaking about.
Sure. I mean, something that I practice in the classroom. I teach a lecture at UMass in the Sustainable Food and Farming program. And something that we do a lot, a couple things. One is just the underlining pedagogy borrowed really from Paulo Freire and Pedagogy of the Oppressed, of, you know, how are we not participating in this banking model of education? For so long, education has been used as a tool to keep society the way it is. You know, we're taught just to listen, not to ask questions, not to critically engage, right? That the teacher knows everything and we're just there to absorb information. So just by shifting that educational paradigm from the banking model, which is designed to uphold the current system, to really a critical inquiry and a model of participation. So having that as a kind of framework for the how. And then just concretely, some of the things that we do in the classroom is I allow students to co-create the classroom together. So it's not me setting how we're going to operate. Students actually, they think about, okay, what can I do to create a really powerful and transformative learning environment? And so we together come up with guidelines for our classroom where people might say, you know, I'm going to really work on stepping up and stepping back. So if I'm really shy and I am scared to put my voice into the room, I'm going to actually operate on my edge and contribute to the conversation. Or if I tend to speak up a lot, how can I actually, my edge is stepping back and allowing room for others. And so this, you know, just like in social ecology, it's setting the conditions to be able to listen, to be able to have, also to be able to disagree, because again, we don't want a society where everybody is agreeing on everything, right? We want to actually be able to hear conflict and see conflict actually as an opportunity for growth an opportunity for stronger decision. So we get to practice this just in the way that the classroom is held by students really shaping their learning environment and actually being co-creators rather than just silent observers.
And I have a question for Emet as well, if that's okay, or I don't know if either one of you wants to ask a question first, or.
Go for it.
Okay, so Emet, you spoke a lot about, you know, this very intentional and challenging inclusivity. You talked about engaging between dominant culture and refugees, and between indigenous people, and also the excluded drug users and others who may be the houseless folks at all. This is not comfortable or easy for a lot of people. And I'm wondering if you want to talk about what are some kind of, I can see it going very wrong. And so many of us can, and many of us would be nervous to think that we could reproduce colonial relationships or racist or exclusionary. So I'm just wondering if you want to talk a little bit more about that, about the approach to inclusivity.
Yes, it's a hard work to work with the people who have been not excluded long time in the society. Even in my home country, I struggle sometimes. I'm not expert in that area, still learning. But first step for me, I participated to their events first, a long time, to gain their trust, gaining trust, because they even myself, English is my second language, still I'm not feeling comfortable to talk on this panel. White people or dominant people will criticize my accent, or they are not understanding clearly. I'm under pressure still. I have lived in English speaking countries long years. Still, I feel that pressure during this conversation. So gaining trust takes a lot of time to bring those people into our projects. But we need to be very patient. If you put very little effort for that sort of people, they may be very shy at the beginning, but they never forget. They, in their lifetime, they appreciate all the time. I have learned how to appreciate people from the minorities. I have lived in Turkey as a white middle-class woman. I was not paying attention to our ethnic minorities much in the past. Now, working with this sort of projects or empathy and sympathy, it's different, as you know. Being a sympathetic to an issue is almost nothing. We need to learn empathy and social justice, restorative social justice. It's long way, long path to pay attention to educate ourselves. Restorative justice, community healing, not only one individual people to help to heal herself, himself, or themselves. Communities heal together. We need to pay attention how restorative justice is working, not only conflict resolution. And yeah, I mean, that sort of things are Western people's problem solving. We need to learn from minorities. Mm-hmm.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perhaps we can go and see, and maybe Ben, you can help and see if there were questions in the chat that came up, or comments, or if we can invite questions from the participants, or points you want to make, or points of disagreement.
I want to hear really what sort of experience people had during COVID-19, especially permaculturist, common land, or what sort of accessibility or disparities they have observed, they have struggled, or they have heard the stories. Mm-hmm. So that's all.
Ben, were you gonna?
Oh, there was a question for Emmett earlier about she had made a comment about cleaning the lands, and I'm not sure if it was from DDT or you know, how was that? Do you know the process which that was used or to clean the land up, or is there a way that someone could find the information on that?
Actually, we have used a lot of composting methods and oyster mushroom methods, and at the end, still we were not sure. I mean, we were getting the soil tested, but we were still skeptical to put our veggies on the ground. So we have started using, building raised beds first, and it took 2 years time after the cleaning process to use the ground to put the fruit trees on the ground. It was even middle level of DDT contaminated land, but it took us 2 years time. I'm not in New Zealand, but if someone wants to link with me, I can ask to my friends, because some PhD students, we were working with universities, some PhD and master students have paid attention to our land as well, just from the beginning.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments from the participants? We can unmute you if you'd like to speak. Just use the raise hand
Actually,
function.
I have a question to you, Cora.
Oh.
What do you think about the in this neoliberal era, there is a privatization threat for the commons as well. It's happening in Africa now. If there are a couple of good working cooperative projects, corporations enter and penetrate to that project, and those wonderful community projects are privatized. It's really big threat now. How can be vigilant to that sort of things?
Yeah. Well, I mean, as I pointed out from those examples to like half a mile from where I live, this is the case of the privatization of common land that could have, been used for the common good, and instead is being used for profit. And that's claimed, to benefit us all, that some people are, able to profit from our common land. So I think it's part of the building community power to defend the land, and demonstrating and having more people involved. And I learned recently about the island of Barbuda, which is part of Antigua and Barbuda, which has owned their land in common since the end of slavery. And the 1,500 residents there all the buildings were destroyed in Hurricane Irma, and they were evacuated, and they've come back, and now there is disaster capitalism, which we also have seen in Puerto Rico as well. And as there are more and more of these crises where there are commons, it's also used as an excuse. And Robert De Niro has a land company where he's trying to take over and privatize the land, and the government of Antigua is saying that the Barbudans are squatting on their own land. So we need to form solidarity, people to people relationships. Obviously in Brazil, the landless workers movement, the MST, has tremendous experience in gaining control and trying to maintain control of the land, and they do that through people power. And there's also armed community defense of common lands. And in Mexico as well, we saw there's a tremendous effort there are huge commonly owned food producing lands in Mexico, which are under threat all the time. And it was the Zapatistas and that movement of people to defend the land, which is the front line. All these frontline communities, of course, from the Unistoten community in Northwest Canada to our own neighborhood, to wherever there are frontline communities defending the land, including, from gentrification or you know, or from landowners who are feeding the soy, corn, you know, food agribusiness machine, we have to think of how, you know, how can we join with them and build community power? And I don't have the, you know, the answer. I think as certainly as Lisa pointed out, direct physical violent confrontation with this incredibly armed up state power is never going to work. And we certainly saw this in Seattle as they attempted to, you know, control a small area of land. You know, there was a gardening project, as you may know, associated with the Chaz, the CHOP there, that where they started to build gardens. But that was also run over. So I am putting it as, you know, we have to build community power, and we do that through uniting with each other to find out what the common solutions are and to assert that we can't turn our livelihoods into profit for others. So I guess while I'm nattering on, I wanted to share an answer to your other question, which was about responding to COVID-19. In Boston area, I began to try to link the urban farming and groups in the area because a lot of time they're spending a lot of time trying to figure out just how to maintain their programs, fundraise, you know, accomplish the goals of the funders, et cetera. And I'm saying, like, now is a moment when we can figure out how to feed our people and, you know, make connections between the suburban/rural farmers and the urban. I work and do a permaculture and food production project at a public library that has been largely ignored by the public library system. And so we're kind of under the radar, and there is a lot of land around this library. And so I was like, okay, I'm going to be a library farmer, right? And so we have, through permablitzes, through connecting with the community, we have raised beds. We have, as you said, Emet, there were folks who were mostly engaged in drinking all day in the park, but then I sat and talked to them. And of course, you know, he's a gardener with incredible experience to teach me about how to, you know, keep my tomatoes from being eaten by squirrels and every other answer to the question. And we were able to build raised beds for him. And now he is not only growing for himself and his family, but for the community and sharing. And we have a lot of infrastructure right here, which we are now turning to commons from individual plots. We're giving food at the library. We just donated, you know, many pounds of food to the pantry, which at the church, which is next door. And I think that it's really clear to me that there's more and more of this decommodified mutual aid and food growing and sharing. And I'm sure some of you on this call have also done this. Yeah, so here's a comment. Natalia's donated all her food that she would have sold at farmers markets to 2 food pantries. I don't know, Lori, if you want to unmute and speak about that. Yeah, yeah, so you're typing in the chat, but I don't know if it's Jono or Hano, I'm not sure how you pronounce your name. Do you want to talk about your co-op, how your co-op responded? Can we unmute you? I don't have the list of panelists of attendees.
Ben, I believe you can allow Jono to talk. Okay, cool, perfect.
Okay, I have done. Jana.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we love to hear you.
Sure, I could just say a little bit more about what was happening there. We have a little food co-op, basically a neighborhood food co-op that serves a very small area, small rural area. But since everybody is commuting to larger urban areas and to town, people had over the last several decades just stopped shopping as much at the little food co-op, little neighborhood food co-op. And so we've been struggling and really we're just a short step from closing when the pandemic hit and had gotten pretty deeply in debt and had a lot of problems. But since then, it's just been such an awakening, a realization for so many people of the importance of a local grocery, a local community spot, a resource center, it's been just an amazing turnaround. So I think it's just speaks to the idea that people are coming around in a crisis like this, and they learn what's the value of local food, local farms, local stores, and the importance of that for community resilience.
Yeah.
And cooperation. I'm wondering if, you know, they're more involved in terms of participation and voice and thinking about what should the co-op do, what should it be for, and ways of talking with each other about that.
Yeah, I would say that we went from a small board that was pretty dysfunctional to now there's a 9 or 10 member board of very committed locals who've really deeply embedded in the community. We're still really coming out of a pretty rough financial situation, and so beginning this more community discussion about where to next. First, we're just trying to get back to zero, back to functioning. But yes, there's a lot of discussion. Right now, it's really about a lot of involvement, getting people helping, tending the grounds, buying some new equipment, fixing up a floor where there was some leaking water over a long time and the floor had rotted away. And so getting involvement and connection and people reaching out. There's people volunteering in the store, just doing shifts at the cash register and shifts in the kitchen, in the bakery. And the visioning, I think, is sort of like grows as that sort of builds and keeps going. So yeah, it's very exciting. It's a nice little example, I think.
Cora, someone is mentioning emergency mental health training. I mean, I think it's really important to underline. Someone has asked me what to do with the drug addictives, including to their projects, our projects, but I have responded that I think being inclusive, being patient and empathetic, and gain their trust. And the other person said that emergency mental health training is the crucial thing. It should be in our educational system. It's good. Thank you.
Yes, and I think in both cases, first off, the inclusivity and seeing ourselves as part of a community with our neighbors, including our incarcerated neighbors who we may, you know, who we want to free as well to be a part of our community. And also thinking about this idea of what can we do for each other without always referring out to experts or referring out to the systems which have failed them before. You know, there is a lot of what were called mutual aid organizations that responded to the crisis, but in many ways, oftentimes they were reproducing the same systems of charity and hierarchy and that slice of pie that I happen to have a little bit extra of at the moment, versus thinking about ways to destabilize those systems and to provide real solidarity and real mutual aid. And I'm part of an effort. There's an article, I have a list of resources which I'll provide with my slides as well, but part of an effort to think about what is emancipatory mutual aid, what incorporates the healing that Lisa spoke about as well, which is so critical and which permaculture really has a lot to gain with. One of the things that happened to me during the crisis is I began to connect with local herbalists who you know, needed more resources. We were able to provide through our micro distribution hub at the library, where we crowdsourced for some funds and got donations. We were able to distribute compost, seedlings, and seeds, these resilient seed kits, to our neighbors and build connections between the neighbors, and also, you know, to provide these supplies, but also it's that connection, the interconnection from that, which I believe is actually both the healing and the, you know, as you know, the setting for building a new society on that, where we're not just solving our own problems, but thinking about each other as neighbors. Nevertheless, we are faced with incredible challenges. of violence and drug use and chronic illness, those with chronic diseases, et cetera. I mean, capitalism has wreaked incredible harm to our bodies and to our minds. We experience tremendous trauma, a lot of childhood trauma, et cetera. And so we can't ignore that that has happened and just say, oh, you can just come and be in, because some people have not been able to integrate it in any positive way. And it may be beyond our individual sort of social work or mental health to respond to that. And we may have to think about, okay, how do we take care of people while it not undermining, where undermining our ability to move forward, or where other people wind up getting harmed. This is a problem that we can face together and not ignore. And that is when I put in there about dialectical harmony, and also this idea of we don't walk away from difficult problems. We work together to solve the problems, and our success is measured by our ability to solve our problems with the processes that we have. And so we have to innovate to change our practices if we're not solving our problems. Walking away is not the answer.
If I could plug two books,
Yeah.
I don't know if we're running out of time or what time we're planning to end here, but I just wanted to plug two books that talk about this subject. One is The Fifth Sacred Thing. Has everybody read that? If you haven't read that yet, run out and get that book, because I don't know, I love nonfiction, but these are just two juicy fiction books that'll keep you entertained. But one is The Fifth Sacred Thing, and the sequel is The City of Refuge. And they're both by Starhawk. And when she talks about writing those books, she talks about why she writes books is to explore these juicy questions. And for The Fifth Sacred Thing, her question is, can we have a successful nonviolent revolution to bring the kind of transformation we want with the violent state police and army and power? So that whole book explores the nuances of that, and it's very interesting. And then the second book, I won't tell you what happens in the first book, but the second book, City of Refuge, talks about what you both are talking about, is how do we really create this new world when people are so deeply damaged and traumatized from the world we've grown up in, that we just end up replicating that violence. So she explores these two topics. And the second book, she couldn't find a publisher, so she ended up having to self-publish. Which is a whole story in and of itself, but it's over 500 pages of exploration on that mental health subject.
Ben, can you guide us also on the, I know it sounded like there were technical challenges with the next panel, but where are we at?
We do not have the next panelist yet available. So if there was more discussion, we can continue. Otherwise, I'm not sure as an organizing committee if we've come up with a specific solution, but I think we would take a small break and then maybe have sort of a free-form conversation with the people that are here. I guess we could, there were some comments earlier about volunteering and the lack of volunteers in food banks. And also, Cora, you had mentioned volunteerism and or participation in systems and sort of having to change those systems in order to kind of accommodate our current needs. And then Emet had mentioned this, with COVID and, how are we all adjusting to things? And I thought that all of this really tied well together in the thought of, as we continue to deal with the current situation and we notice that there are shortages of volunteers or food, it seems like there's quite a few changes that are happening. But does anyone have comments about, how those changes are taking place or along those lines? I know personally from organizing permablitzes, we weren't able to organize in the same fashion, but we've created smaller work parties to kind of maintain that mutual aid. and helping people in creating a project or two versus several with, you know, multiple people all at once.
I'm so glad you shared that example, Ben, because it's really good. I think the idea also of, you know, again, like not walking away from the problem and saying how we're going to do this, but confronting it and figuring out the workarounds. It's extremely challenging, obviously, to do so many things, but people are coming up with ideas all the time. One massive challenge that we face right now is that so much organizing, access to resources, et cetera, is mediated through internet access. And there are many people who do not have good, reliable internet access, or they were getting it through the libraries, which remain closed, at least in, you know, in the Boston area. And even the libraries are thinking that they're just going to mostly be online in order to protect people. But some of these, I noted that in New York City, my friends there were not permitted back into their community gardens by the officials had put locks on the doors, on the gates. And in the Boston area, we responded pretty quickly by coming up with what were the procedures we were going to do to protect people. And we instead put those in place, and it preserved the access. And we were, of course, we were successful in many ways, different people in different venues, in preserving the ability to get access to community gardens, to do our community farming efforts. Another effort that we did was the schools are closed. Many of them have raised beds. Of course, many school raised beds are disasters because they never put in place the human infrastructure. They put in the physical infrastructure, but not the human infrastructure to produce food in the schools. And so there's been an effort to organize and to do it safely and even to get permission from the Boston Public Schools. We're now growing in 13 school gardens that have multiple beds and donating the food to pantries. So I think some of it is like, what is the actual challenge? Is this a risky behavior, or are we being, you know, is it unfair and can we do it safely? And figure out how to do it because it has to be done. A lot of people are overcoming those traditional barriers in order to do what needs to be done.
I feel like in the permaculture worlds, we've struggled with connecting and pooling these resources or getting the information out there as to all those things. And there's several comments in the chat box about different resources. And I just wanted to share yesterday's presentation that we had about the membership works program on for PAN is really going to help us to share those resources, make those more accessible, find out where people are and how to contact them in a safe manner. And also all of the resources from yesterday and today will be available as well. So if you missed a link or think you didn't see or find something, we're going to continue to have access to all the information that we're sharing today. We're trying to continue to make as much available as possible so that we feel like we can have a better understanding and a stronger community that's able to support one another. All right. So I have made Stephanie the host because she is taking over from this point on. And I'm just going to double check the chat here one more time to see if there was anything I missed.